Hello, this is Stories from Earth. Welcome to my place. Today we're reading Memoirs of a Country Doll, written by herself, by Mary Curtis. Chapter 5, Gardening. One day I observed my mother put on her things very slyly, call her governess, and tell her to put on her things also, and come out. I thought to myself, what can this mean? My mother has put on her clothes, called the footman and ordered the carriage, and has taken her governess with her. I guess it is something that I am not to know, for if it were not, I certainly would have gone with her. As I did not feel very well, I thought that I would lie down on my bed and take a nap. In a couple of hours my mother came home, and coming into the room where my baby house was, took me out of the bed, without saying a word to me about her having been out. I burned all the time to know what she had been out for. I could hardly eat my dinner, and when tea came I could eat nothing. The next day at 12 a man rang at the hall door, and my mother ran down to let him in, a thing that she had never done before, and which made me so curious that I could not stand. In a few minutes my mother came running upstairs and put a little bundle into my hands. I opened it very quickly, and what did I see but a little hoe, rake, spade, and wheelbarrow. I thought that I could never thank my mother enough. When she saw how pleased I was, she told me that I should have a piece of ground, and she would get me some seeds, and she would also immediately make me a gardening dress, so that I could commence the next day. Oh, how I longed for the morrow to come, and when the morning dawned I was almost crazy. My mother put on my dress, and giving me my tools, took me into the garden, where I took my first lesson in gardening. I thought it was delightful. My mother told me that I should soon get along very fast, and that I should plant some flower and vegetable seeds. I felt very smart, and began to work away quite industriously, making improvement in the looks of my garden. When my mother appeared and told me breakfast was ready, I could hardly believe it. The time had passed so quickly. The next morning my mother waked me at 5:30, and dressing me, took me out. As we were going along to the garden, we saw by the roadside a flock of geese, and as we passed along they set up a tremendous hissing. Oh, how frightened I was! But my mother laughed at my fears and told me not to be afraid, as they would not hurt me. When I got to the garden, I was all of a tremble, and for 5 minutes I could not do anything. I got the garden all finished that morning before breakfast, and so I went in, and changing my dress, went out to take a walk. As I went along the paths, I could not help feeling overcome. It was a beautiful spring morning. The dew was on the grass, and the birds were singing their morning song of praise to the Maker of all things, as they soared towards heaven. When my breakfast bell rang, I came in and told my mother of my pleasant walk, and she seemed very glad. The next morning my mother showed me how to plant seeds, after which she watered them, as she said the watering pot was too large for me, but that she was going to buy me one, so that I could water my plants when they came up. In a day or two my mother, her governess, and I went into the city and bought me a little watering pot and a little book that treated of gardening, which I put with my other books. One morning, about 2 weeks after planting my seeds, I was surprised to see several little green things which I thought were weeds, and I was just going to pull them up when I happened to think that perhaps they might not be weeds after all, and that I would stop and ask my mother. My mother appearing up the gravel walks just then, I asked her what they were, and she told me that they were the plants just beginning to come up, and that I must water them every morning carefully, and soon they would come up higher and higher, then the leaves would come out, and at last little buds would shoot forth and turn into flowers. But in order to have them do so, I must keep all the weeds away from them, water them morning and evening, and put up sticks for the running ones.